Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Final Disaster. This is Battlefield 1. In today's video, we're going to be talking about all the new details released regarding the March 2017 DLC for Battlefield 1, They Shall Not Pass. DICE has given us a bunch of new information regarding both the 4 new maps, new elite classes, a new Behemoth, new tanks, and new stationary weapons, and we're going to be talking about all that in today's video. Starting off then with the new Behemoth, the Char 2C French giant tank. Now, it wasn't actually strictly seen used in World War I, instead a little bit in World War II and before that. However, we're going to be getting it as Behemoth on some of the maps for our new DLC. This has been rumored for quite a while. A few people have already guessed it, while some people said it was likely not enough to be actually qualified as a Behemoth, not strong enough. DICE obviously thinks differently, and we're going to be getting it as brand new Behemoth in the coming DLC. Now, originally, the Char 2C was able to hold a crew of 12. Now, I'm guessing that this is probably going to be a little bit less because, frankly, that would be a third of any enemy's team on a big game of Conquest at 64 players. So it may be somewhere around the typical 6, 7 or something like that we see for most of the Behemoths in this game. On the topic of tanks, however, there is a new tank. We don't know if it's a heavy tank, a medium tank, or a new tank class for itself. The Saint-Chamond is a brand new assault tank gun. Now, you'll be seeing it on your screen right now. It looks pretty much like a heavy tank. The original tank is something like 400 or so units were built for the French army, and they were actually used in France during World War I. Now, they have one of the largest guns seen in World War I on a tank. They have a 75mm cannon. And just to give you a comparison, the A75 heavy tank, the current largest, heaviest armed tank that we have in the game, only has a 57mm cannon. So my guess is that possibly this isn't necessarily a replacement for a heavy tank, but instead a new tank class for itself, an assaulter tank class, or more something like a tank hunter class. If you're familiar with any kind of tank strategy or other tank games, you will know basically that a tank hunter is a tank usually armed very heavily and specialized in taking out other tanks, usually relatively quick, fast, nimble, however less armored than some of the heavier tanks. On the other hand, countering that argument, as you can see on the picture, there's a number of LMG positions, and the expected crew number should be somewhere around 5 here, because there is 5 separate guns, or at least there was 5 separate guns originally on the Saint-Chamond tank, 4 LMGs, and of course the main gun. So we don't know too much yet about this tank. More details likely will come out in the following weeks as we get closer to the actual release of the DLC. However, it remains an interesting topic, and I can't wait to see what this brings to armored combat in the new maps for Battlefield 1. Obviously, with a new DLC, we are also getting a new game mode, and this sounds relatively interesting. Essentially, it's a tug of wars. It's officially called Frontline, and it's described as something where it's a mixture of conquest and rush, where you fight over control points, where both teams fight for one flag at the same time. When an objective is captured, you move on to the next, basically pushing back and forth, eventually until a team is at their HQ, from which point on, apparently, it turns into a rush style section with telegraph posts. Sounds like a relatively lengthy game mode, sounds like a relatively complex game mode, sounds a little bit also like carrier destruction. I'm not quite sure if that's the right word for it, but at least from Battlefield 4, where you had the number of capture points, it's a little bit different, but you had a number of capture points, and once a certain amount of tickets have been reached, you would start to attack the actual carrier of your enemy team by placing rush objectives and blowing them up within the carrier. Now, on that occasion, it didn't work too well because getting to the carriers was a problem, and teams usually didn't focus necessarily on those objectives. That was also because you could still capture and use and gain points from conquest objectives. It's not clear how this will work in this game mode. However, it looks like it's going to be a little bit more structured, and it could provide an additional new game mode, which frankly Battlefield 1 right now desperately needs, given that half of the game modes aren't really played. My only concern with this game mode is, however, that generally in the past, from experience, as most of you Battlefield players will know, complex game modes don't really turn out too well because players can't be motivated to play the objective, whereas with Conquest, Rush, TDM, and in this case newly now since Battlefield 1 Operations, the simplicity of the game mode makes it accessible for everyone, and you end up playing the objective whether or not you like it, unless of course you're camping in some Moving on then to the new elite class. Now this is something like this new Behemoth, the Char 2C, that was teased just a few days ago in that short few second clip that we got from DICE, and it turns out that that pretty much actually was the new elite class. It's called a Trench Raider elite class. It's going to be specialized in melee and grenade kills. Not that we necessarily needed more grenades and grenade spam in Battlefield 1, but DICE is of the opinion we do, and as such this class specializes in club kills with its Raider club, that is of course melee combat, and throwing ridiculous amounts of grenades. That's all the details we have up to now, but basically what this means is that this class is very likely going to be specialized in close quarter combat, getting up front, and personally we don't actually know if it even has any kind of proper weapon. I'm guessing at least that it will be equipped with a pistol to defend itself. However, this is going to be the first elite class that truly specializes in melee combat, and is somewhat of a nod to the original thesis or original statements by DICE that they wanted to focus this Battlefield more on melee combat than previous games in the past. Whether or not you like this, whether or not you think this is a good idea, that's up to you, but it looks like we're at least going in that direction here with the next DLC. Moving on then to the new stationary. Now this is something I'm a little bit worried about, if I'm honest. The new stationary supposedly is a siege howitzer and looks something like this, as you can see on your screen right now. And the description of this brand new weapon goes down the lines of basically it's a giant mortar. It works similar to the field cannon, only that it targets, aims, and shoots similar to something like a mortar would, either for the support class or your typical vehicle mortar. I think also the Dreadnought has a similar kind of shooting style with its main cannons on there. Basically, it's an indirect fire stationary weapon. Now, once more, it is debatable whether we needed more indirect ways to die, more ways to be killed as infantry from things that we can't necessarily control. DICE has, however, decided that we do, and admittedly, it is, of course, historically accurate. Artillery and the many forms of different indirect fire were a huge part in World War I. The fact that we haven't had much of it up to now is simply because it's not necessarily a fun aspect of the game, and DICE primarily wants to make a shooter obviously that is fun and not necessarily historically accurate. With that being said, let's move on then to the 4 new maps. I should say the additional details that we've gotten about these 4 new maps, because of course we've already received brief descriptions and concept art previously from DICE regarding the 4 new maps. We now, however, have screenshots, 1 for each, and I'll be mixing the concept art in here as well so you can get a better impression of the maps and a little bit more detail in the very brief description for each of the maps. I've picked out the important parts so you have a good overview of what to expect of these maps, or at least what we know as of now. Starting off then with the first map, Verdun Heights. And now this is the one you were probably most impressed with when the concept art came out. It's the one with the forest on fire, and the key points about this map supposedly is that players are going to be fighting in and around, and the key emphasis here is on in these burning forests, as well as the mud-filled craters of thousands and thousands of artillery shots previously fired. So it should be pretty much like the beginning of Scar, just with burning trees and maybe a little bit more crater. I mean, at least the pictures show a very craterous landscape. There should be plenty of opportunities for a good bit of infantry cover play, as long as there's not too much indirect fire from the artillery shells that we should expect to be hitting in here. I'm guessing this is one of the maps that is going to have those new howitzer guns placed on strategically important positions, or of course objectives. It looks like a very interesting map. It looks like something we haven't seen in Battlefield before. Burning forests that we could possibly actually fight in. Sounds like a great idea, and I'm very much looking forward to, of course, fighting on this brand new map. Moving on then to the next map, Fort Vaux. This looks like, and this has previously been said, this is not necessarily news, the brand new Operation Metro or Locker. It's a huge bunker from World War I, one of the first bunkers to actually see serious combat in and outside. We don't yet know if there's actually an outside part, a proper outside part to the map, because if you remember Operation Locker, there wasn't really much to the outside of that military installation. However, if you remember Operation Metro from Battlefield 3 or Battlefield 4, there was a little bit of an area at the back where there was a little bit more combat going on. It was still nevertheless very much bound to the inside of the subway, and therefore it could be interesting. They could do many things with this map. This could be very much like Giants of Karelia, or even Hangar 21 from the Final Stand DLC, where there is a big, somewhat inside area to the maps with multiple objectives. However, it isn't the only part of the map. That yet remains to be seen. We haven't had any outside shots. Other noteworthy points that we have received of information regarding this brand new map, things that aren't necessarily obvious from the screenshots, are that there will be a heavy emphasis on the flamethrower. In other words, the flamethrower is going to be the elite class in this or on this map, and should probably make the flamethrower much more powerful than we previously had seen him. He's usually not very useful on a number of maps because simply he can't get close enough. A great example of that is Empire's Edge, where he's absolutely useless as soon as he leaves that D point because most of the map is very open. It looks like this map will get a bit better use out of this elite class, which, while I'm not necessarily a big fan of this, should be a more effective way of using the class nevertheless. Another thing that we should note on this is that it looks like the map could be relatively destructible. If you see to the right of the official screenshot, there is actually a caved in part. Now, this could just be part of the map design because it's been hit by an artillery shell there, but there may be some opportunity for some kind of dynamic destruction or levolution here, unlike Locker, which was, while there were destroyable walls, a relatively rigid map that wasn't too easily interacted with or destructible. Moving on then to the next map, which looks very nice, very sunny, very pleasant. I'm sure that won't be very long as soon as combat properly ravages through this beautiful village. It's Soissons, and that is the best French I can do. Yes, I am very sorry. This map focuses on the Saint-Chamond tanks, which are the ones I previously mentioned, the brand new tanks. It supposedly plays early hours, so just after the sun rises. So we should probably see one of the first proper sunny maps in Battlefield 1, which is something I was mentioning to a colleague the other day. The Battlefield 1 generally seems a little bit dark. I know that's the setting and it's deliberate. I'd like to see a sunny map though, so I'm looking forward to that. It otherwise looks very similar to the main areas of St. Quentin Scar, just somewhat of a village and not much around it. Yet we don't have a lot of details regarding this map just yet. It remains to be seen what it can offer. What should be mentioned about Soissons is that apparently rivers and bridges are going to play a key role. Some of the key objectives should be situated around them, and there's going to be a lot of fighting over those bridges, and that there's going to be a lot of tank combat there, as already mentioned, with the Saint-Chamond tanks. Last but not least, then we have the Rupture map. Now, this map supposedly plays in a territory where a previous large-scale tank battle took place. Now, we don't know if this is a reused map, maybe even the one we just spoke about, Soissons, or if this is a map for itself. I'm guessing it's going to be a map for itself. It does, however, play along the same rivers, so rivers should once more, possibly at least, have somewhat of an important role. It also mentioned that there's going to be plenty of opportunity for ambushes with lots of cover with the wrecked tanks and trenches. It also looks very picturesque and should also provide for some very nice screenshots by the looks of it. With everything then being covered regarding the new DLC that we as of now know, and you being up to speed, up to date, feel free to leave down below in the comments your opinions on the directions DICE is taking regarding the design of its first DLC, They Shall Not Pass, as well as any concerns you possibly have with what we currently know about this DLC. Feel free to, of course, as always, also leave any video suggestions or comments regarding this video down below in that comment section. And with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 video.